Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into an ancient Indian wisdom story that's going to completely flip how we look at hard work, hustle, and what it actually means to be productive. We live in a world that absolutely glorifies being busy 24/7, but the tale we're looking at today, it tells a totally different story about how true success is actually achieved. Let's kick things off with a pretty counterintuitive question. What if the laziest person you know is actually the smartest? I know, it sounds totally crazy, right? We are so conditioned to associate sweat and visible stress with making progress. But as this ancient tale is going to show us, sometimes the people who appear to be doing absolutely nothing are actually the ones preparing to achieve the most. Part 1, the myth of laziness. Let's dive right into this by looking at our main character, a boy the entire village basically deemed entirely useless. So the villagers defined his lack of physical labor as pure laziness. They saw a boy who just lay in the shade all day while so-called honest men worked from sunrise to sunset, but they completely miss reality. While his body was perfectly still, his mind was racing. He was watching the birds, learning their patterns, observing the world, and essentially building this immense, quiet library of knowledge. He wasn't turned off at all. He was intensely tuned in. Part 2, the King's 5 Tasks. Things start to get really interesting when the king decides he needs to find the cleverest mind in the land to be his heir. The king announces this massive 5-day contest. Naturally, this draws the absolute strongest warriors and the swiftest runners from all over the kingdom, all ready to show off their physical prowess. They're presented with 5 seemingly impossible tasks: cross a formidable lake, move a massive block, fill giant tanks, ring a high tower bell, and finally, catch the king's incredibly elusive bird. Part 3, brute force versus smart thinking. This brings us right to the core conflict of our explainer. How do the physically gifted tackle these monumental tasks compared to our highly observant, supposedly lazy protagonist? The contrast in their approaches is just brilliant. The warriors did exactly what you'd expect. They ran, they strained, they shouted at immovable objects, relying entirely on brute exertion and sweat to attack the problems. I mean, you can just picture these massive, brawny guys yelling at a giant rock, right? But the boy? He took a totally different approach. He simply paused. He watched. He used that mental library to find the invisible, simpler path that everyone else was just too busy sweating to even see. The eye that sees the simpler path is the rarest thing in the world. Man, that quote captures the absolute essence of this story. He tackled tasks like moving the great block and ringing the tower bell, not by straining his muscles, but by understanding a really fundamental truth. Physical strength? Well, that can always be hired. Speed can be trained. But true insight, the ability to step back and find that elegant solution, you can't just easily buy or force that. Part 4, the prepared mind wins. Let's see how this all builds to the climax of the story, transforming our protagonist from a village outcast into something much, much greater. Opportunity favors the prepared mind. We've all heard that old saying, but it plays out perfectly right here. The 5th and final task was catching the king's bird. Now, when the boy succeeded, the villagers probably thought it was just dumb luck, but it was actually the direct result of preparation. He caught that bird because he'd spent years quietly laying in the shade, learning the exact patterns and behaviors of birds, all while the whole village laughed at him. His mind was perfectly prepared for the opportunity. So, the crucial point we have to take away here is that the boy actually did work incredibly hard. We really need to redefine what hard work looks like based on this text. He prioritized mental preparation. He worked hard with his mind first, gathering data, observing, strategizing. Only when the thinking was completely done did he use his hands. Success in this story happens when hard work meets smart work. Part 5. Work smarter, not harder. So, how do we actually take this ancient wisdom out of the story and apply it directly to our own endless modern daily tasks? First off, remember that a lazy body is not a lazy mind. We have to fundamentally unlearn the idea that constant motion always equals progress. Quiet observation isn't laziness at all. In fact, the source text makes a really powerful argument rushing into action without a plan and refusing to actually think deeply. Well, that is the only true laziness. Taking the time to observe and strategize is literally the ultimate form of active work. Let's lock in these core life lessons. First up, Choose wisdom over strength. Remember, you can hire strength, but you can't hire the insight needed to find the simple path. Second, think before you act. Before you instinctively grab a tool to solve a problem, just pause. And perhaps most importantly, before you blindly join a rushing, shouting crowd, you absolutely must pause and ask yourself if the crowd is even running in the right direction. I want to leave you with a final, provocative question to ponder in your own life as you tackle your next big challenge. Where are you running when you should be watching? Are you exhausting yourself with brute force, or are you taking the time to build that quiet library in your mind? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Take a moment today to step out of the hustle, find some shade, and just watch.